that's just what people do. The theory is you always find somebody new. I guess there was a time I believe that was true, but now...
Oh my God, you came back for more. Dudes, I am so happy to have you here with me today. I can't tell you how exciting this is for me. I'm tired, so I may not look excited, but I'm really excited. I'm so happy to have you. Thank you. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button, because this is going to be a long series about the Constitution taught to you in a way that you've probably never learned it. And just do understand, this is all antebellum Constitution. This is not all about what has happened to the Constitution since inception. It is all about the Constitution as it was intended and as our founders wanted it to be, and as it should still be, but is not. So thank you again. Please hit that subscribe, hit the like, and sit back, relax, because we have a little bit of lesson going on today. So in the first couple of lessons, we learned that we are not a nation. We, the United States, are not a nation. We are a confederation, a confederacy. So we are a group of sovereign nations who have come together to create a union to serve all of the purposes of those states. So that's kind of confusing, and if you're confused with that, please go back and watch the first couple of videos. So then we learned that we are not a democracy, that there's no democracy in the United States federal government, that we are a republic, we're a representative. We're not a representative democracy or any of that. If you don't understand, go back and watch that video too, because it's really important that you've seen all of the preluding episodes before this one, so that you understand where we are now, okay? So anyway, getting on to today's lesson. So after establishing the government and establishing that there needed to be branches and figuring out how all that's going to work, the next question is, okay, so what powers do we give to the federal government? You know, each state has its own authority over itself. Each state is a nation in and of itself. So what powers do these states want to hand over to the federal government? Well, if you think about it, it seems pretty obvious. And it was covered by guys like Madison. Excuse me. I still have this cold. I've been going to the doctor a lot this month, by the way, so you might not get as many videos. So anyway, so you have to think to yourself, okay, so I'm going to get into a marriage. And in this marriage, I'm going to want to retain my sovereignty as a human. But I'm going to also have to give up certain things in order to be married, in order to get the advantages of being married. So, you know, what do I need to give up? What of mine do I have to give to her, in my case, to make the marriage work without giving up who I am? Because if you give up who you are, it's all irrelevant, right? So the same question was asked across the states. The states who were reluctant about this whole, you know, confederation thing, they were still very reluctant. They'd been promised that the only purpose is really to bring together a union was to protect all of the states so that each state could remain sovereign, right? Not to, you know, destroy the sovereignty, but to reinforce it, to strengthen the sovereignty of each and every state. That was the fundamental purpose of creating a federal government to begin with. And we've lost that now. We've lost that sense. But, you know, the question that you should ask every time a law is passed is, does the federal government have to do this? That is this something that could not be handled by the state? You know, if we have a problem in a state, or if each state has a problem, is the government, the federal government, really the right person to fix the problems that are generally regional within the states? More often than not, they are not. Most problems that we want to hand over to the federal government and become, you know, nationalized when they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be regional problems. So that's what's happened to us over the years. Now, I'm going to back this up for you. I'm going to explain to you why, you know, how our founders saw it this way, okay? So looking at what Madison did when he was talking about, you know, the powers of the federal government, you know, what should we do for them? He says this, okay? The Constitution proposed by the convention may be considered under two general points of view. The first relates to the sum or quantity of power which it vests into the government, including the restraints imposed on the states. So does that make sense to you? Do you understand what that means? The sum of power invested into the government. How much of our power are we going to give to them, and how much are they going to have? Including how much power are we going to give them that would restrain us in our own authorities, right? So that was one point of view that needed to be looked at. The second point of view, to the particular structure of government and the distribution of the power among its several branches. So the next question there, or the next statement was, referring to, all right, so we've established that these are the powers that the government needs, and now we have to establish which ones go to which branch of the government. And we'll kind of blend that into this as we go along so that you'll kind of get a feel for it. But for the time being, we're going to pretty much go through in the same platform that James Madison went through when he was trying to sell the Constitution to the states, right? Again, remember, the states didn't want to be together. The states only wanted the Union to prevent from war. So that was the real reason. Everything else was, they didn't want to lose any powers. So he had to sell it to them. So he continues. Under the first view of the subject, two important questions arise. Number one, whether any part of the powers transferred to the general government may be unnecessary or improper. So the first question, in terms of what powers should the federal government get, the first question is, were any of them unnecessary or improper? And so you have to go back and look at it like this. If the power that we're handing them could be handled by the state, like we talked about before, then why is it necessary to give it to the federal government, right? So that was one question of it. If it can be handled by the state, then why don't we leave it to the state? The second question would be whether the entire mass of them powers be dangerous to the portion of jurisdiction left in the several states. So would giving the federal government certain powers allow them to, over time, take powers from the state? I love Madison and Jefferson. I think they were both very brilliant men. I think they had incredible foresight, but they didn't see this far ahead. They had no idea that no matter what they did, the sum of the powers handed to the federal government would foster a nationalization of authority over the states as it has today. Today, we don't think of the states as independent sovereign nations. We think of them as subjects to the master government, the Washington, D.C., powerhouse that tells the states what they have to do, what they can do, and what they can't do. And it even tells the people what they can and cannot do, which, by the way, there's nothing in the Constitution anywhere whatsoever that gives the federal government any authority over what you do. They cannot ban anything from you. They cannot tell you where you can and cannot go. The federal government just doesn't have that authority. It's just not in there, but we'll get to that. So anyway, so we're getting into those two questions. When asked that, the Madison philosophy is like, well, the government has 6 purposes, right? There are 6 things that we need to, or 6 powers that we think are necessary and proper for the federal government. And he was very clear that it was important that we keep those 6 powers are it. That's all. There's no more. The federal government gets no other powers, just these 6 powers, right? So let's read them, shall we? The first power that is necessary and proper for the federal government is, security against foreign danger, to secure the United States against foreign danger. And I think today that's the one we're going to cover. The second power, regulation of intercourse with foreign nations. The third, maintenance and harmony maintenance of harmony and proper intercourse among the states. The fourth, certain miscellaneous objects of general utility. The fifth, restraint of the states from certain injurious acts. And that is the states injuring each other. But we'll cover each of these. We will go in depth in each of these. Next is provisions giving efficacy to all of these powers, right? So what does that mean? Provisions giving efficacy. That means the ability to tax. That's it. That's all it is. To pay for all these other things. So we're going back to, rather than making today too long, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover each one of those independently, and I'm going to measure them against the Constitution as we go so that you can see how they work into the fundamental doctrine, okay? So let's go back to the first one, security against foreign danger. What he defined that as, and he wrote an entire essay about that. What he defined that is, the powers of declaring war and granting letters of marque, or mark, it depends how you want to pronounce it, of providing armies and fleets, of regulating and calling forth the militia, of levying and borrowing money. And he goes on to say, security against foreign danger is one of the most primitive objects of civil society. So, he's established this. Okay, we've decided to become a union. We want to be friends with each other. We want to protect one another. So we need to establish a government that will kind of uniformly secure all of them against invasions. Looking at the time, looking at the era, which is really much different now, they were constantly under threat of invasion by, the British or even the French or, the Spanish. There was some Spanish wars going on at the time. There were a lot of wars going on. There was a lot of people moving around and trying to take land, and, all of the empires of the era were just trying to expand. And they knew that, and they knew that each state would get sucked into those empires one at a time unless they united to fight against all of them. So they gave Congress authority over the military. Yeah. You see, today a lot of people talk about how the president is commander-in-chief, so he gets to decide everything for the military. That is patently false. Okay, the first part is true. The second part is a complete misunderstanding of what it means to be, the commander-in-chief. So we're going to talk about that for a second. Congress has the power to regulate the military. They're the ones who get to when I say regulate, I mean, get them into regulation, make them effective, make them strong. It's Congress that supplies the weapons. It's Congress that determines the tactics and the techniques and the skills and all the things, whether there's gays in there or not. That's congressional. It's not the president. The president has no authority to say that, and none. He does not get to decide who's in the military. It's not up to him. So all of that is specifically left to Congress. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution leaves all of that in congressional hands. The president doesn't have that authority. I'm sorry that you've been, miseducated if you think that the president gets to run the military. He doesn't. The president doesn't run any of the military. He's not allowed to send troops to the border because he doesn't like people crossing the border. That's not in his wheelhouse. He does not have that. It's not in his purview. He doesn't have that authority. He can do that temporarily. The president does have the power to temporarily send forces to somewhere, in the case of an emergency where, things are really bad. We don't have time to get Congress together and approve it, so the president will send them. But shortly after that, the president has to answer to Congress for doing that. And Congress actually, according to the Constitution, can say, look, you got to bring those troops back, or you get impeached. You have unnecessarily engaged our military into a war that we disagree with. So you have to pull them back out. And if you refuse to listen to us, you get impeached. So if you look at today, that could apply, believe it or not, to the border. The president sent U.S. troops to state borders, which is a different crime in and of itself. But the president sent military to state Well, technically, I guess you could say they sent them to the Mexicans' border, not any of the U.S. borders. There's no such thing as a U.S. border. They sent them to the states, the Mexican states' borders. Congress could just turn around and say, oh, well, we don't want them there, so bring them back. And that'd be it. He'd have no choice but to listen, because that's what the Constitution says. Read it. I know you're mad at me right now. You're angry at me for saying things that you just don't want to believe. But I don't care. I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm telling you what the Constitution says and what you have no choice but to accept. Now, if you're a post-constitutionalist, like everyone in the Democratic Party, then sure, it doesn't matter, right? The president has all the authority in the world, because the Constitution is just a 200-year-old crusty old document that doesn't. They couldn't have understood what was going on today. Blah 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 blah. But if you call yourself a political conservative, if you believe that we should adhere to the Constitution while simultaneously supporting sending troops to the borders, you're a hypocrite. Or you're just an accidental hypocrite. You may be just ignorant. You may have not actually sat down and read the Constitution. There's no authority to do that. So that gives you an idea. So what is foreign danger? You know, calling a bunch of Mexicans moving here a foreign danger, John Adams tried that. We discussed that in the immigration one. John Adams tried saying that, well, French people who come here are a threat against, voting and they're against society and all this stuff. And James Madison and Thomas Jefferson both called out the militia and said, all right, well, if you send your federal troops into my state and try and remove what you are now calling illegal immigrants, I will kill you. We will start a war, we will secede from the Union, and we will kill you, because you do not have that authority, Mr. Federal Government. And this is coming from James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. So, if they had, believed that there was no such thing as federal immigration law, then yeah, we'll get to that. So no, it's not authority based on some president's idea of what is a threat. It is Congress who decides what a threat is. And before anybody can do about it, they have to actually declare war. So unless they've declared war on Mexico, we don't get to tell Mexicans to leave. Sorry, it's the rules. I didn't make them. Don't get mad at me. Now, other, actual invasions, actual threats, that's different. That is something that is, again, Congress has to decide that. But, that's, if somebody's coming over through, the Mexican border as troops in marked uniforms and all that, then yeah, the president should definitely send troops down there. And chances are Congress is going to be okay with that, because we are physically being invaded. So not some weird interpretation of it. It's, clear and present. So anyway, I think I've gotten far enough into that. So yeah, you understand that the first duty of federal government is to secure all the states against foreign danger, right? In our next video, we'll go to the second one, okay? The second one's going to be the regulation of intercourse with foreign nations, which still kind of works on the same thing, but again, we will talk about who has what powers when it comes to dealing with foreign nations and how that is laid out in the Constitution. So if you have any arguments, questions, concerns, please feel free to message me. I'll try and get back to you. Again, I'm kind of busy lately, so, I've got, it's that time of year where I get all my medical tests. If you don't know, I'm a cancer patient. I have been a stage 4 colon cancer patient now for 7 years, and I'm still winning the fight, but I still have to go to the doctor a lot. So you get videos on and off. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you coming and visiting me. You are so awesome. I love you.